It was a new year, and the dinosaurs thrived even more in the Jurassic Zoo. Last time, the audience was asked to come up with the names of 6 remaining Dimorphodons within the flying zone, and there were some great suggestions as always. Firstly, one Dimorphodon would be named Swoop, as suggested by viewer Novabolt. It was a very cute and pet-like name, fitting of this somewhat cute Dimorphodon. The same could be said for the next suggestion, which was Rudy by Gaming Indominus. Viewer Ross Graham came up with the name Zazu for one of the flyers as an homage to the Lion King. Viewer Order66 then came with, as his name suggests, a tribute to Star Wars by naming one of the Dimorphodons Solo. Mr. Random Roleplay then had the great idea of naming one of the critters Tiny, which was a very cute name, and finally viewer Jim the Beast suggested Flare, which was given to the final remaining Dimorphodon. Be sure to stick around to see which dinosaur you get to name next. The Canadian Jurassic Park was still a ways out from being finished, but there was not that much space left to build. For now, there was more than enough to see for the visitors, and despite the setback with the raptors, the visitor numbers were booming once more. The new flying dinosaurs were a 5-star attraction, but golden oldies like the Mosasaurus or the Hot Springs were still in high demand as well. Thrill seekers even liked getting close to the raptor fences, despite science discouraging this. Since there was only a limited amount of ground left to build and excavate, the researchers and money holders needed to deliberate on what dinosaurs will be flown over. There of course still needed to be more 5-star carnivores to be added, and everyone already agreed on which one. But before that, another smaller herbivore needed to be added first. In the past few weeks, some new discoveries were made by the scientists, and a handful of new dinosaurs were bred and created. One of those was the cute and small Minmi. The Minmi was part of the Ankylosaurus family, and several of those had already been added to the park. In a way, the Minmi could be seen as the Australian version of the Ankylosaurus. It was therefore also that one of those Minmi was called Woozy. Now, where other similar types sometimes prefer to be in small groups, the Minmi actually prefer to be in a larger pack. Their build was smaller and more horizontal than its brethren, with the exception that its hind legs were longer. So long in fact that they could properly run, something most of the other Ankylosaur could not. For the longest time, scientists believed that they had a pretty complete image of what a Minmi looked like, since the skeleton with even skin imprints had been found, but was later dubbed the Kumbarosaurus, when it was labeled a different species. Regardless, the scientists used the information that was available before that to complete the DNA strands to make this magnificent creature. They were very playful and looked a bit younger and even cartoony, meaning they would undoubtedly be a big hit with the younger audiences. The Minmi were placed furthest away from the entrance, currently in the eastern side of the park. The visitors would need to walk a bit to get there, but if they did, they would be greeted with the playful Minmi group. They were built so horizontally that despite not being very small, they could still disappear in the tall grass. It was in that regard a good thing there were so many of them. The park would make sure to have other bigger attractions around the zone as well to reward the visitors who took the effort to get here. Because even though the Minmi were cute, they stood a bit in the shadows of the other dinosaurs that were on display elsewhere in the park. Especially when considering the next dinosaur that would be introduced to the park, all spotlights would be on the king and queen of the dinosaurs. It was time yet again to introduce the world to the beauty and the ferociousness of the T-Rex. In the past, different parks had already played around with the notion of a T-Rex couple, and that too, like the Mosasaur couple, would be a great hit. But for the Canadians, they wanted to do something special, and rather than just a T-Rex couple, the park wanted to show off a T-Rex family. 2 parents and a younger offspring, though the offspring was of an age where it was definitely not considered an infant anymore. The different T-Rexes were very easy to distinguish. The parents had both a sand-colored skin tone, with the male being slightly bigger than the female, and their child was lighter in tone with blue hues. The blue color in its skin was especially fascinating, since it could mean that some of its ancestors might have had the same color pattern or bluish color, except these were artificially created, of course. There were no ancestors to speak of, and thus the coloring had to be caused by a particular DNA splice that was used to bring both parents to life. Now you might have already expected it, but this time the T-Rex family needed to be named by you, the viewer. We have the Mama T-Rex, the Papa T-Rex, and their single young. Please come up with a good name for these beautiful creatures and let me know in the comments down below. The 3 giants were flown over to a massive enclosure near the flyer zone. This was also near the Nasutoceratops, and there was a whole leap of land here in which they could build the T-Rex area since they needed so much space to move around in, especially because they were with 3. Now despite not having the behavioral inhibitors, the carnivores could be seen on very good terms with each other. There was some nervousness amongst the scientists since a few were worried that the parents were going to be aggressive towards their offspring, which was shown with other animal species after a child had lost the age of infancy. The same could be said for the male and female, since it was not uncommon for them to go their separate ways after raising the child. See, that was the interesting aspect with the T-Rex. They would often be seen roaming alone, but once a nest was built and they had laid their eggs, the father would always stay close to the mother until their young were old enough to hunt and kill for themselves. Yet these 3 dinosaurs showcase that the couple could still very well fit together after that stage was done. There was also not a strict hierarchy within the T-Rex family. They were all relaxed with one of the parents sometimes sleeping while the infant did stay close to the other without looking too dependent. When they ate food, it wasn't like the parents needed to feed first or wanted to be sure their young would get the first bite, but in that regard, it seemed like everyone was equal. Perfectly balanced in that sense. And thus the most famous dinosaur had been added to the park and people loved it. Everyone wanted to see the T-Rex family and wanted to get a glimpse or maybe a selfie with all 3 in the background, something that actually was still pretty rare occurrence. Now with these kings settled inside the park, it was time to add another herbivore to populate the eastern side of the zoo. It would not be an attraction as famous as a T-Rex, but nevertheless, one of the more famous ones in that it was the mighty Stegosaurus that would be added. The Stegosaurus was amongst the Triceratops, Raptor, and T-Rex honestly one of the most famous and well-known dinosaurs that would roam this park. Even though some of the visitors had laid eyes upon these giants multiple times, it still was an incredible sight to behold with how majestic and awe-inspiring they looked. Their giant plates along their spine made them look so much larger than they were, and the dangerous-looking spikes at their tail demanded respect. Yet it has already been said multiple times that compared to other herbivores like a Triceratops or Ankylosaurus, that the Stego had the lowest chance of surviving an attack by predators. Even grazing herd herbivores like a Parasaur or a Montosaurus could use their speed to get away, but a Stegosaurus could in no way, shape or form outrun a T-Rex. If they were hunted, they would eventually come to a clash. It was definitely possible for the Stegosaurus to win a conflict by hurting the T-Rex badly with its tail, but its entire side was vulnerable to the T-Rex's mighty jaws. In that sense, the Ankylosaurus was much better protected with its shell and spikes. A group was being brought over, and what people might not know is that the Stegosaurus could be very cranky. They were very social and nice to each other and could also work in bigger herds with other dinosaurs, but were very protective of their turf. When it came to sharing a large field with other herbivores, they were not so picky. But if a small group of Stegosaurus lived in the forest, it would get very agitated and aggressive if it sensed another dinosaur in its territory. In that regard, it could be labeled as the hippo amongst the dinosaurs. A dinosaur that might be seen and known as pretty docile and friendly, but capable of killing many more intruders as initially thought. Unless those intruders were something big, like a T-Rex for example.